So here I have my pattern laid out, and you can see that I have the selvage here, and I've laid my trousers out so that this line, which is very important, this is called your straight of grain or your grain line, and that needs to be parallel to this selvage line. So to do that, you would pin one side or put a weight on it and measure. So that's 5 3/4, and then this one is just over 5 3/4, so I'm just going to move that slightly. And you probably think, oh well, how can that make a difference? It does with trousers because they won't fall properly, and you need them to fall properly. And you will continue on and do that the same with the other leg of trousers. And I did play a bit of pattern Tetris and have them opposite each other. The tapered leg variety takes less fabric than the straight leg because you can do this, and then there's no obvious direction in this fabric or nap either. So you just pin all the way around and then cut out. So before I start sewing, I need to decide on what thread I'm going to use. I'm just looking at these in terms of colour at the moment, because I have large spools of polyester on my machine in these. So this is a black. This is how I test my colour. Just lay it across. Mid grey, I think that matches well. And then this is a lighter grey, which is quite light. This is what I have on my sewing machine. It's basically this thread but in a large cone. So I think if I lay this across here, I think that's a good match. I tend to actually use grey, one of these greys for my seams, unless it's white. Like black, 2 mid greys and a white, and that should do you for nearly everything because it tends to blend. So I think I'm going to go with this one. If you wanted to do a bit of visible top stitching, I'd probably go with the light one, but I think I just want it to blend in for this one, so I'm going to go for this cone of thread. So I need to load up my bobbin and thread up my machine, and we'll get started making our Pietra pants. So here are all our pattern pieces cut out. I'm just going to go through them so that you can see which ones that we've done and which ones you need. So first of all, we have the facings on top here. This is the front side facings, and also 2 pieces of interfacing to match. Now just be careful when you're cutting these out, you need a pair of interfacing. See the way the shape of them is different. So you need a pair of interfacing to match your pair of fabric. So that's for our front side piece. Then we have just of interfacing 2 pieces. This is to interface the top of the pockets so that they don't bag out. We have our center front facing, which I've actually already interfaced. So that's 1 fabric and 1 interfacing on the fold. We have the back waistband. So these are all for the waistband and the pockets. This is the back waistband. It's not interfaced because the elastic will need to move in it. And that's on the fold as well. And then we have 3 pieces which are larger. This is our pocket. It looks quite large for a pocket, but it folds up, and I'll show you that. Then we have 3 large pieces which are trousers. We've got the front, the back and the side. And then there's the back, which is the largest pattern piece. So I'm just going to quickly show you how to actually put the interfacing onto your pattern pieces. So I've already done this one here, and the reason you have interfacing is to make it a little bit stiffer and more sturdy, because this is around the waistband and it gives it more structure on the front panel. Remember that this front panel won't be coming in, so there's actually 3 panels on the front, you'll see on the pattern. So this one has already been interfaced. And as you can see from this fabric, so I've got a pair of them, there's a difference between this fabric and now this fabric, which is interfaced. It's much stiffer and has more structure to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our iron. First of all, you want to press these. Now this fabric looks fairly smooth, but I would always give them a quick press before you actually begin to add on interfacing, because any creases will be stuck that way. So we give them a little quick press first of all, just to take out any creases there might be. And then you can see we've got a pair here. This fabric is the same on both sides. If your fabric isn't, it will make it much easier, but this is a pair of pattern pieces and we just need to match them up. Now on our interfacing, you've got kind of a bumpy side. That's the side with the glue, and that goes downwards. Now this is Vilene interfacing, I think it's 220 in charcoal grey, and you need to have a setting of 2 with a tiny bit of steam. Now you should really test this out, because all interfacings can be slightly different and all irons are slightly different. So the first thing I do is just lightly hold your iron over the interfacing just to get it to stick initially, and then hover over it. Just go slowly. Takes 8 seconds for the glue to melt and bond to the fabric below. A bit of steam is no harm as well. And that's all interfaced. Those 2 pieces ready to go. So we have then our pocket. So this piece, which is the pocket, and you've cut 2 of these. Now, like with all my pieces, I'm going to mark this pocket. It's very important that all those notches are cut in, because you really do use the notches on this part. So I take that off, put it to one side, and I'm going to take one. This fabric is the same on both sides, so I need to mark which is the wrong side. So I'm just going to mark the wrong side with some chalk. So you see here we have a short side, which is the part which is at the waist seam, but this part down here is actually going to be brought up here. So we need to interface this part. So I'm just going to flip those around, and it's these longer ends that I'm interfacing on the wrong side. Place your interfacing on the top. And fuse that interfacing. So it's the sticky side down. Just make sure that's really well stuck. Do the same on the other piece. Sticky side down. The next piece we need is this long thin piece, which is pattern piece E Pietra Pants side front leg, and you know that it's the right one because it says pocket notch up here. So we take, now don't forget I put these markings on, so I know that's the wrong side. So we put right sides together. So let me take this guy, we'll just do one at a time. So the right side, and we take this one, right sides together. Line those up at the top. And your notches should also line up. There's a notch there. And we pin that in place. And we're going to sew along there. So we're going to sew this line along here. Here we're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so I've actually got a little mark here. You could use a bit of washi tape or masking tape or something like that and just put it where the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance is, and that will help you guide through. So I do a back stitch and then get going again. So what you do with the pocket bag facing up, take the pocket bag and push it and the seam allowance together. So they're all facing each other. So the pocket bag is going up and so is the seam allowance. Give it a nice press, and then you want to understitch, so that's stitching a line close here. And what that does, that will keep that facing of the, so this is the inside of the pocket bag, inside the pocket bag, and you won't see it peeking out the top. So we're going to sew that there really quickly. Seam allowance towards the pocket bag, and we sew that. I'm using the edge of my foot here against the edge of this seam, and I'm going to move my needle over a little bit. Once you have that done, you can fold this here. That's your pocket, and then give it a press. Once that's done, then fold along here and press. So you have these two very strange looking pieces, and you take this one, and there's a little notch, and that notch either side shows where the fold is for the bottom of your bag or your pocket bag. So you want to do is you want to line up the edges here, and those two notches there will determine your fold. I usually put a pin here, and that will make sure it doesn't move anymore. Pop a pin in there. See again, my marks, this is the wrong side. I know I'm doing it correctly because the wrong side is there. Flip it over. Ooh, how lovely is that? So what we want to do now is baste from here down. So they're just stitches inside your seam allowance just to hold that pocket bag down. Our basting stitch is going to go along here very close to the edge. So again, I'm going to use the edge of my foot and move my needle over. If you don't have this action on your machine, you can just simply move over your presser foot. Take out my pins as I go. don't worry about back stitching because this is just to keep it in place. And there's no need for, it's not a final seam. So there's our pocket bag done on one side. This is the side panel and we need to do this for the other side. So you continue on doing the same. So we have our two side pieces with our lovely pockets done. So we're just going to take those, well I'm going to take one of those to show you. And what you need next, we'll go to our pattern pieces now. That's our back leg. So we need the front. So we have the front leg. So I've always keep these pieces attached until you're ready, the pattern pieces until you're ready to sew. And that way, if you have a break in sewing, because we don't all have the luxury of time where we can actually sew everything in the one go, and then sometimes projects take a bit longer, so they end up being put aside and you don't know what it is. So we need to attach. Now I'll just open that out. There is no difference here with the right side and the wrong side of my pieces, my two front pieces. So I'm going to get my chalk and I'm putting a mark, and this is the wrong side. I've done this. If you do this at everything at the start, it might be a bit easier, but I'm doing it as I go along. And you can see on the other side of this, I already put a mark to say it's the wrong side. So I'll just show you how those two pieces would attach on a pair of trousers that are already made. So you can see here the pocket slants upwards towards the center panel. This is the side, this is the center front. And we have top stitching here. So we've made this panel and we need to attach this one and then also add our top stitching. So here's our finished trouser pocket side panel. And then right side of our front panel, and we're going to attach these together here. So you lay them right sides together. And we pin all the way along. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew along here and then overlock this and then top stitch, but I will show you those steps. So I have now sewn that together and then overlocked it. So your next thing to do is to press towards the center. So that means that seam needs to go that way. So I'm going to flip it over this way. So it needs to go towards this curve. So if I open that out, that seam is now this way. And I'm going to give that a quick press. Just check my iron's not too hot. No, it's okay. So I'm pressing this out here. It'll just help you then when you're top stitching to hold it in place. This is a cotton fabric. It's a lovely cotton Cady. So it has a nice weave to it. Checking that my seam is that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch along here, and if you have an edge foot, that could be very useful. So you're top stitching along here, and what you want to do is lengthen your stitch length to about 3.5, just to make it 3.5, to make it just a little bit easier to go through and keeping your tension right. So top stitching all along here, and then repeat the same with the other leg. So the next thing we need to do once we have these two panels done is to attach them together at the front. So we lay them on top of each other. Now we're not doing this seam, only this seam. So only the front, center front of the trousers. Lay those on top of each other and pin. Making sure that it's all matching up at the top. There should be a notch down here. Match up that notch. And then match up the bottom seam there. So I'm going to sew this and then overlock it as I've done before. So that's sewn and overlocked. So that means our front trousers are sewn at the front, but not the legs. So the legs are still separate. So if you sew the legs together, you're making a skirt, not a pair of trousers. We sew them later on. So we move on then to our back pieces. So we take our back leg view B, and we're basically doing the same thing that we did with the front leg. We're going to attach them here. So we're just going to sew these along this seam here. I'm going to pin them in place so they don't move when I'm at the machine. Overlock, and then we'll move on to the next step. And there's our front sewn together, and now our back pieces sewn together. So we move on now to making our waistband so that we can attach our waistband on. Next we're going to move on to our waistband, and our waistband contains 3 pieces, well 4 pieces, 3 pattern pieces, 4 pieces. The back, which is cut on the fold and is not interfaced, we don't need that at the moment, and the 2 front pieces which are all interfaced. So you've got one cut on the fold, that is our center piece, and then the 2 side front facings. So you've got one and then another one underneath there, and they are mirrors of each other. Now what you want to do is line them up so you have these almost 2 curves here. So not that straight edge. The straight edge is the edge of the garment, the side seam, and you know that by the grading that's on the side. Now our notches here are very important. Make sure those notches are in and because they will help you line up. So you place this on top of each other. This piece here. Sew either side here with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we need to press this open. So I'm just going to set the seam here first. And then I'm going to press this open. Now normally I wouldn't actually recommend pressing a seam open. This is what the pattern requires, and I tend to just, if that's the case, not do it. But in this case, this is your facing and you want it to be nice and flat. I'm going to give this a little steam. Make sure that's nice and flat. If you have a clapper, place your clapper down straight on top afterwards, and that will really help flatten that seam. As you can see, I'm going to set the seam first. So I'm just ironing it flat like that. Then I'm going to open it out. And that just helps that seam relax before actually setting it into its final position. Give it a little bit of a steam. So that's those 2 open. Take the front. Now our next step now is to take the front of our trousers, and then we get our facing, and we need to line up our facing with the front of our trousers. So I'm going to pin along here and line everything up. Pin either end. And line up there. Making sure it's nice and flat there like that, because when it's turned the other way you want it to be nice and flat. So I'm going to sew this along here. I also need to overlock this end here because this will be a raw edge. If you don't have an overlocker, what you can do is just turn it up and then sew it in place, but I'm going to overlock that there again. So I'm going to sew this, and I'm also going to overlock down here. So there's our facing in place, and I've overlocked this edge because this edge would be a raw edge otherwise. So we are going to press this facing, or sorry, we're going to press the seam allowance up towards our facing. Take your time doing this because it is a curve. And you don't want to burn that interfacing that you've put on as well. And then what we do is we're going to top stitch, or sorry, what we're going to do now is we're going to understitch here. So that's a stitched line that's on your facing, so it's underneath, it's not on the top layer. So this is going to be holding this facing into the inside. So we're going to sew that along there. Can you see the stitch line there? So I've stitched all along that line. So I've stitched all along here, and that's holding my seam allowance down. So then I can flip this over, and you've got one final little finishing touch here. Turn it over. Now I wouldn't worry too much if this doesn't line up perfectly here. What you want to make sure that it fits in and it sits flat. You're facing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten that out, and I'm going to pop a little pin in the side there just to hold that there. I'm going to pop a pin here at the waistband just to make sure that's all flat. Now what we need to do now is you do a stitch in the ditch here and here, and what that does is that will hold your facing down. And I have made these trousers and not done this, and the facing then flaps about when you're putting it on, and it's a whole big faff. So you're going to stitch really close here, and so close that you won't be able to see it. Plus, if the thread's matching, do this with a matching thread, it will really help. I'll just put that flat there. Just don't want anything to be shifting around while I do this, so I'm just going to put a couple of pins here. So we're doing a tiny little row back and forth here, and that will just hold your facing down. If you want, you could turn it over and you could actually just hand stitch there, and that holds the facing down as well. But we're going to do it as the pattern says. So the first thing I need to do here is to make sure that needle is going to be in the ditch. Now it's a bit over to the left, so I can either move the foot over, or if you have the option, move your needle over and then just check. Yeah, that looks like it's done right at the edge. If you have an edge foot here, that would make a massive difference. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward. And that's it. And we do the same on the other side. So that's our front done. Just need to carefully trim those threads, and we move on to the back piece. So you take your waistband, make sure all your notches are all in there. And first thing we need to do is to fold down one edge. So the next thing now is you have to fold this up 1/2 inch. So I'll just get a measuring tool or ruler. I actually have a little mini quilting ruler here, so 1/2 inch. If you have one of those generates, 1/2 inch actually brings you to your first notch. So that first notch there, if I just fold it up to that, that's actually a 1/2 inch. So that's a handy notch to help you measure. So it's a 1/2 inch up on your first side. If you have one of those generates hemmers, they are so handy for this kind of thing. Now we just make sure that's 1/2 inch there. Now this one is a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to fold that up to there, and that's 1/2 inch. Yeah, if you have one of those generates hemmers or a hot hemmer, this can be very useful. Just make sure that's even. It's not quite even. I'm just going to beep. Hot. Then we fold this up along our center notch and then give it a good press all the way along. And what you're going to have is about a 1/2 inch here. So you've got about a 1/2 inch. So when you fold it out, it should look like this. So we take our trousers, the back trousers, facing up, and we line this up along here, pin, and then sew with our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew along here and then do the next step. Next part is to press our seam allowance up again. So you want your seam allowance to be in your waistband. So I'm just going to give that a press. And what you're going to do is you're going to bring this piece here. Remember this, the back is going to be a little bit bigger because it's going to be pulled in. So we're going to line this up. Now you'd be thinking, okay, I need to line it up with there, but what you have to do is you have to line it up with that center notch there, so that we will be folding this over. So we line that up with that center notch. And the same on the other side. So the center of the waistband there, where we press that crease, we're lining that up, popping pins in along here. So all the way along there, so the back. Make sure that seam allowance is facing up. So at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pin and sew all the way along here, not this top edge. So this front is in line with that the center crease and the notch at the side. Seems a bit strange, but it will make sense later. So we're going to sew along here and sew along here. So that's all sewn there, lovely. And this is the front, and we have more fabric here. than we do at the front piece. Next thing we need to do is we need to take this and we bring it down. So over the front piece. It seems a bit strange to do this, but what you do is you fold this over here, and we're going to make sure it's folded all the way over so that it should be lower than the other side here. So what you want to do is that this piece is lower than your stitch line here. So if you've done it right, it should do its job. So we just make sure it does, and that reaches perfect. So I'm going to pop a pin in there. And then on the other side, we do the same. You pull that down. So you take this and you pull it down over here, and you'll be able to see if, yep, it's slightly lower than the other side, and that will help you stitch in the ditch and hold your make your casing for your elastic. So what we need to do is sew here and sew here, same seam allowance as on sides, 5/8 of an inch. So you've sewn that in here so that when it flips over, it creates your waistband at the back. Isn't that very clever? So the next thing we need to do is actually insert the elastic. So we want to put the elastic in here to here. So measure the elastic according to the patterns. So I'm going to place my elastic, which is obviously a lot shorter because it needs to stretch and then pull the trousers in. And I'm going to sew it on this side. Now I'm going to need some clips. So when pins make it very difficult to go through layers, like putting pins into those layers is going to be very tricky. So I'm going to use a clip just to hold it in place so that when I bring it to the machine, I know where it's going to go. And then the same on here. So we're centering this elastic in our channel that we've made. So one there and one there. And we want to sew these two here within the seam allowance. Go back and forth a couple of times because you don't want that to break. Once you've done this, I would actually try them on and make sure that elastic is the size you want it to be, because if it's too loose, this is the point where you could unpick this and then shorten it. Now I've made these before, so I know this is the right size elastic for me. So once I have my elastic in and I've tried them on so I know that's the right size, I'm going to overlock. Now I leave this to this point so that I'm actually overlocking the elastic in and I know it's really secure, and then I'm overlocking down here. So I'm going to do that all in one go. So that's now all nicely overlocked, lovely and neat along the sides. So then I need to turn the facing, so the waistband, so you're going to turn this inside out here like this. And like this, and look at that waistband now. How lovely is that? It's just absolutely gorgeous. So this can be a little bit tricky to do, so this is what I do. You want to take this back part and place it down here. So this is our waistband. So we're taking the top part of the waistband and keep our elastic in there and bring it down to just below that stitch line and pop a pin in. Now we'll be flipping, just checking those pins on the other side so they're nicely along the edge there. So then I scooch this along, push that seam push that under there. Flatten it out, and again this should be pulled down to below that stitch line there. You can actually feel it. And we just pop a pin in, flip it over. No, I've hit that waistband there, so I'm just going to bring it down a tiny bit more. Yeah, that looks good. And be careful when you're doing this, take your time. So this is folded down here like this. So we're putting a pin straight through, and then we're checking the other side to make sure that it hasn't hit that waistband, and we're only just at the ditch line. So if you can see there, those 3 pins I've popped in are right along the ditch line of my waistband. So I do this first part, and then once I've sewn here, then I scooch it along and I do the other part, because otherwise it's too difficult to do it all in one go. So I'm going to sew along here. Now I'm going to sew very close to that edge there, because I don't want to go in here. If I sew higher up, I'll end up sewing up at this part of the elastic. We now have one side sewn in nice and neatly there, so we can't see the stitch line on that waistband. Now if you do go into it, don't worry too much, but what you want to do then now is just scooch that along. So you're pulling this elastic out, and you have the gathers on the other side to make this flat. See how that makes that nice so that you can work with? And you do the same thing along here, pinning, making sure that you're within there, not on this waistband, and within that ditch line, and just sew along there, and then that'll be your stitches, your waistband all sewn in. So that's my waistband all sewn in nicely there. You can top stitch this waistband, but because of the fabric I have, which is like it's almost like a suiting weight, I don't want to have anything else on the back of that. I'd like it to leave it like that. It's not going to twist because it's only that one size. I don't think one small piece, I don't think it's going to twist. The next thing we need to do, which is our last thing bar our hems, is just line up underneath here. Just make sure, so we line up there, pin all this line here. So we're going to pin the trouser on the inside legs all the way along, and then sew and overlock. So we're going to sew all the way around there, overlock, and then I'm going to overlock the hem opening. So just while I'm overlocking, so that's the last bit of overlocking I'll need to do. So that's our Pietra pants all sewn up. I'm going to turn them inside out and try them on. So I've overlocked the bottom. Now you don't have to do this. This is just something I like to do because it makes turning up your hem that bit easier. And if we only need to turn up a small bit, you can just turn it up by that 1/4 inch. So I'm going to try them on and see what length I need them to be. And then, because they're the tapered ones, I can't do them the same. Aren't they gorgeous? I'm going to try them on and I'll come back to you in a few minutes when I've taken them up. You can see them on me.